Ever learned something that made you go, how the heck did humans figure that out? If so, what is your prime example of that? Just learned today on this very sub that the Jimpy, also known as the suicide plant for very fitting reasons, has edible fruits as long as the toxic hairs are all pulled out. Also on this sub, the word Jimpy is a generic swear word, and in that language repeating a swear is supposed to increase its meaning tenfold. So someone tried eating the fruits of a plant that's more or less named frick. Spoken language in general. If I utter a lot of noises in a very specific order, you understand my thoughts. I understand evolution, both social and biological, but it still blows my mind. I always wonder how certain words came into existence. Like when languages started developing, every time when someone saw something new you just make up a word. If I recall correctly, you start with individual words for very basic, survival things. Water, food, danger, animal, etc. Then maybe you get animal food, which is meat. Or maybe you get danger tooth animal for wolf, then danger tooth animal meat for wolf meat. A lot of these early words would have come about. Combine that with the fact that people are lazy. Words contract over time. Sounds change. Words slip. Language is literally word of mouth. And we've only very recently had the organization to standardize it properly. The first dictionary happened 160 years after the printing press. And even around then, regional dialects were written as well as spoken. Consider that modern apes can be taught meaningful sign and icon languages, and wild monkeys have different types of calls for different animals. These adaptations and evolutions happen over millions of years until we get a complex, spoken, grammatical language. And during this time, people are moving and dying and finding new things they need names for. Meanings change, vowels shift. Languages split and merge and evolve. These days, of course, we have words for dang near everything. Even things we don't have names for, we can create one, define it, and distribute it at dang near light speed. Most of these terms are scientific these days, like quasar and parasocial, but it does still happen, mostly by compounding and contraction. Anything that becomes edible only after several steps, like a mushroom you have to boil twice. What was it discovered by a murderer on a budget who used the same poison mushroom in 3 pots of tea? Cover it in lye, bury it in the ground for a month, then it should be good to eat. This fish is deadly except this one tiny bit. Steve died after boiling and eating that mushroom. Let me boil that bee one more time and see what's up. Calculating the weight of another planet. My dumb butt just can't comprehend the mathematics that go into working that out. All of the planets have moons orbiting, or we've orbited spacecraft around them. You can get a really good approximation of the mass of a planet by measuring the orbital period of anything orbiting it, and knowing the average distance of that object orbiting. You can mostly ignore the mass of the moon as long as the moon is a fair bit smaller than the planet, and still get a really good approximation. Use the formula m equals 4 pi to a 3, gt2. A equals semi-major axis of the orbit in meters. Average distance. G equals gravitational constant equals 6.673 x 1011 cubic meters kg1s2. T equals orbital period in seconds. M equals mass of planet in kg. Example. Moon Io takes 152,853 seconds to orbit Jupiter at an average distance of 421,700 kilometers. Ignoring Io's mass gives a calculated mass of Jupiter of m. Jupiter equals 4 pi to 421, 700, 0003, 6.673 x 1011 1,528,532. Mass equals 1.899 x 1027 kilograms. The Fugia pufferfish contains the world's most powerful neurotoxin. But if you cut that sucker just right, you get tasty fish that sells for $100 a plate. And the best chefs will be able to taint the meat with just enough tetrodotoxin to give the diner a vague sense of tingling, but not die. Since 1958, Fugia chefs must earn a license to prepare and sell Fugia to the public. This involves a 2 or 3 year apprenticeship. The licensing examination process consists of a written test, a fish identification test, and a practical test, which requires the test takers to prepare a dish of fugu and eating it. Only about 35% of the applicants pass. Small miscalculations result in failure or, in rare cases, death. I only know about this dish due to that Simpsons episode. So like plants that are normally poisonous or just injure humans in general, who was like dang that thing looks kinda tasty, I might have to eat that. What gets me are the plants that are poisonous until you boil them 3 or 4 times, changing the water each time. Like, how do you get to attempt number 4 at cooking the same pot of greens after the first 3 attempts poisoned your family? Hunger, I know, but I still think I would have given up by then. Tapioca pudding. Raw cassava is poisonous, cyanide, but if you peel it and grind it down it makes tapioca pudding. So how did that happen? How did a person figure out that after cooking it was okay? So maybe some tribe was starving and sitting by a fire and a cassava tuber fell in the fire and after it cooked they said, frick it, I'm gonna peel it and eat it. A mystery to me. To be fair, it doesn't make tapioca pudding, it makes tapioca. Earlier today I was going through this exact subreddit. Someone asked for some not so fun facts, and someone commented a goat apparently has the most resemblance to humans when it comes to the vagina. Don't like how he had to add apparently. Yeah, they taste completely different. A friend showed me a video on a building that was discovered buried under sand in Spain. I think it was in Spain. Can't remember what it is called, but one of the buildings was so immensely beautiful and detailed. Even the tiled floor had paintings on it that had been preserved over time. Just boggles my mind. They even had an amazing plumbing system and other things you'd never thought was possible for the era it was built. I'll have to find the documentary and link it, it's amazing. I'm waiting. Sailing upwind. Sailing with the wind is one thing, but how did they ever figure out how to design a boat capable of sailing upwind is beyond me. I understand the physics of why it works, however it still baffles me that humans figured that out as early as they did. Boats can't sail directly into the wind, but they can tack into it. Triangular sails act more like airplane wings. Square sails mostly act more like parachutes blown by the wind, but they can still tack, just not at such an angle as triangular sailed ships. I looked it up years ago after playing Sid Meier's Pirates. Milk cheese. Humans were pretty much all lactose intolerant for a long time. Only babies could really drink milk because of feeding. So at some point, people just said frick it and brute forced milk into adults' diets. Created cheese and ate so much that a significant portion of the world can now drink it as adults. Even modern lactose intolerant people just do not give a frick and still drink milk and cheese products. We can't figure out climate change, but goddamn we can suck on a cow's tit. Mayo, this is 100x better than my comment about milk. That you're reading this after I zapped it out of my thoughts through my fingers, past the keyboard, under the wire, and out your display at light speed into your thoughts. Everything that made this moment possible. Glass. Who the frick would just melt sand? Found out that glass was made after a campfire was on top of some sand and it made glass. Likely either finding fulgurite, aka the leftover of when lightning strikes sand, or possibly folks in the desert who suffered a fire or some such and noticed the leftover material from the heat. Least that's my guess. Any recipe that calls for a pinch of another ingredient. I mean, will the whole pot be ruined if you don't add that pinch? Bay leaf. Too much can ruin a huge pot of chicken soup, at least in my opinion. How the heck did someone determine that mixing eggs, milk, flour and sugar would make a cake? How did that guy figure this out? Some bored king called his baker in and said, "Steve, I am going to behead you if you serve me one more boring fricking loaf of bread. Make something different or Claudius the executioner is going to lop off your head." Steve went back into the kitchen, looked at his pantry, saw like 4 ingredients and couldn't find the yeast and said frick it, let's see where this goes. How to make metal. Like seriously, how does the thought hey if I put this rock in a fire I can melt it and make a decent tool even occur if the very concept hasn't been invented yet? Well, it took ages to figure out how to work different metals, like copper, bronze, iron. Bicycles. Those things have no right to stay upright. It took a lot of experimentation to make them easy enough to ride, and now they're everywhere. Pretty much anything relating to nuclear physics, power, weapons etc. Also, Muslim scholars performing cataract surgery and mapping the human anatomy in ways that would make Da Vinci crap a brick. More bizarre that they figured these things out about 1000 years ago. Still can't wrap my head around the discovery of phosphorus. Brand thought human urine could produce gold via alchemy, so what did he do? He went to a bunch of pubs and collected and distilled shitloads of pee. After a while it started to glow. Oh, and sometimes it would just randomly freaking ignite. Mind-boggling. Brain tanning hides to make leather. You kill an animal, scrap off its fat meat, soak it in lye, scrap it some more, rinse it and rub its own brains on it until it's soft and then put it in some smoke. If you do too little or too much of some steps, it can completely mess the whole thing up. Every animal has enough brains to tan its own skin. Just watch any of those primitive technology shows on YouTube. It's amazing to think how they figured out these intricate processes to make things with just simple natural materials. It's crazy. The entirety of chemistry and all its subunits that dive deeper into the subject that is chem, ochem, inorganic chem. To have the existence of everything presented in such an organized fashion is fascinating. I'm a chem student learning mass spectrometry, infrared spectroscopy, and nuclear magnetic resonance. These are basically techniques to gain information about a molecule. It amazes me how anyone could have invented these things and how they learned to interpret them. Mass spectrometry. You shoot electrons through a molecule and knock an electron out of it. From there it fragments in 2 different ways that I know of, and you shoot those to a sensor down a tube and you kinda aim the molecules with magnet strength. Someone had to find a way to shoot electrons through something, realize that they fragment, learn how they fragment and which bonds and which mechanisms. Then they had make a sensor that could somehow read the molar weight of positively charged fragments. People somehow found out what wavelength certain chemical bonds absorb photons at and charted that, right to left and upside down. They then looked at a graph, realized wide peaks were made by hydrogen bonding, and mapped out what functional groups look like what. NMR. Someone figured out that putting a really strong magnet to a molecule lined up the spin of nuclei in an alpha or beta position, which have a tiny energy difference, and then found out what frequencies different types of hydrogens respond to. They also had to know that the results basically show stuff about the hydrogen next door. There's so many weird tricks in NMR, and one is that signals split by each other lean towards each other on the graph, and my professor doesn't even know why. All these things work on weird methods that I have no idea how anyone would even start to interpret the data, much less invent the device. Australian here. There are a bunch of plants here that are highly toxic, but the Aboriginals have ways of preparing it that make them fine. How did they work that out? A lot of the foods we eat are just weird. The original potatoes are poisonous to humans, and according to Wikipedia can cause the following: nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, stomach cramps, burning of the throat, cardiac dysrhythmia, nightmares, headache, dizziness, itching, eczema, thyroid problems, and inflammation and pain in the joints. In more severe cases, hallucinations, loss of sensation, paralysis, fever, jaundice, dilated pupils, hypothermia, and death have been reported. Yet somehow, someone in South America saw someone eat a potato and suffer those symptoms and thought, I think I'll eat one as well. Same goes for the tomato plant and eggplant. And then there are certain types of animals that we eat. Who was the first person to look at a crab who thought that looks delicious? Who figured out that cow's milk was useful? And why did they keep using it when it'd take multiple generations for anyone to become lactose tolerant past the age of about 5? Speaking of milk, who figured out that we could use the milk from goats and sheep, but not from pigs and horses? Literally anything. From something as complex as a computer to something as simple as a nail clipper. Us shiny monkeys are pretty cool. mushrooms, and just poisonous plants in general. How the heck did they figure out which were poisonous and which weren't? More specifically, how the heck did we find out how to cook them? There are some poisonous fish with such specific cooking methods that if you cook a tiny bit off, then you're dead. Woad. It's like a 15-step massively complex series of chemical reactions to get blue dye out of the woad plant. It involves animal urine, steeping and draining stuff, and results in a colorless liquid that only turns blue after oxidization. How they ever discovered this is a puzzle. Guns confuse me. You shoot an object fast enough to kill somebody with just one hit, but it's small enough to fit in a shopping bag. The first person to ever try durian fruit. What in the world would possess someone to open it, smell it and say, yeah, this goes into my mouth? What in the world would possess someone to open it, smell it and say, yeah, this goes into my mouth? Starvation. Hollandaise sauce. Such specific technique and proportions. That and any really complicated pastry, meringue, or souffle. That crap is delicate AF and somehow someone fricked around enough to discover it. Who's got the time? Quicksort. This letter was sent in 1959. Dear world. The way you sort things is that first you do a half-acid bubble sort where you get bored halfway through an iteration and find the first half of what you want to sort and do a half-acid bubble sort on that half and then pick the first half and you see where this is going. Anyway, if you count up all the half-asses and half of half-asses and so on, you end up with less asses than if you let your bubble sort do its whole butt job all by itself. Live. Tony in the Moscow. Math in general. Just like how we came up with numbers that we all recognize, signs that we all recognize and work, just amazed as to how we figured all that out. During a speculum examination, i.e., vaginal examination, when you spray vinegar on the cervix the abnormal tissue turns white. So who was the guy making a salad dressing during a vaginal exam? Counting time. Like how many days in a year, how many hours in a day, minutes in hours and seconds, and it's all related. How humans figured out how to make certain stuff edible. For example, you need to boil fly amanita 2 to 3 times to extract the toxins from the mushroom to make it edible. Horses can be turned into glue. Who the FCK saw a horse and thought, betcha that can hold stuff together if we kill it. How Pythagoras figured out that the earth was round and guessed the size of the earth very well using nothing more than mathematical inference to come up with the hypothesis and a couple of sticks at different locations to test it. Well, you know, syphilis was brought to the world by Christopher Columbus. Well, it was only previously found in llamas and alpacas. My wonder is what the frick was Christopher Columbus doing with those llamas? Brass instruments. How did we figure out that if you spit into a long metal tube, you can make music? And how the frick did we standardize it in the Western world? Who even kept at mushrooms after the first few deaths? Death, drug, or delicious? Nah man, there's something there, I know it. The size of the near universe, all the galaxies around us. How do we get satellites to take pictures of these places that takes light years and years to reach? Cheese. Like, humans have been making cheese for longer than we've had writing. And to do it requires not just milk, which is a whole other how did we ever figure this out thing, but specific cultures and ingredients added to the milk or strained out of it, specific temperature, light, and humidity environments to allow it to properly ferment, and a lot of patience. Just how? Record CDs discs. How can you store vast amounts of information in scratches on something so small? And similarly, transmission of music sounds to a similar medium. I was always baffled by how someone can take a sound and put it on an album. I get how microchips work, the voltages, the logic gates, the billions of alternating voltages per second leading to a computation. And I get that we didn't discover it in a vacuum. We had generations of people building on top of the knowledge of the previous generation. But we took sand, filled it with lightning, and taught it to think. That crap is mind-boggling. Surgery. Think of how crazy it must have sounded hearing someone say I can slice a person's guts open, do some things to their insides, and make them better, and they used to do surgery without anesthesia, so the patient used to be wide awake for surgeries. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.